Sunday School Leader. It's time to look ahead. Let's see what is going on this week in Sunday School. Remember, we're in the unit entitled Stand Up, How to Fight Injustice. We are in week 4. The title of the lesson is Stand with Humility. It's out of Esther chapter 5, verses 1 through 14, which is the entire chapter of Esther 5. And the point of the lesson is that humility ultimately wins the day. So previously in Esther, we have the orphan Jewish Esther, and she was raised by cousin Mordecai. She won a beauty contest, became queen. Mordecai then learns of an assassination plot against the king. He tells Queen Esther. Esther then tells the king. The king lives, the conspirators are executed. There's another guy in the kingdom. His name is Haman. He's promoted to a very high position in the kingdom, and Haman's pride swells because of this. The king commands everyone should bow down and give honor to Haman, but Mordecai refuses. This infuriates Haman, and Haman plots to kill all of the Jews. Mordecai then calls on Queen Esther, and Esther says, "Hey, what can I do about it?" Mordecai then replies, "You were probably put in this position for such a time as this. You probably won't be spared either unless you do something." So she told Mordecai, "Gather all the Jews, fast for 3 days, then I'll approach the king." And now the saga continues. So she did what she said she was going to do. But they fasted for 3 days. She put on her royal robes, and she just didn't barge in and make demands on the king. She was humble. She was humble before the king and honored him. She stood there in the court with her royal robes on, and she waited for the king to see her. Now, just doing this alone, that was kind of taking her life in her own hands, because no one, not even the queen, approached the king on their own. And then he saw her, and it pleased him, and so he held out his golden scepter. Now, this meant he approved of her being there, and we saw this a week or so ago in a previous lesson. This means she could approach the king with her request without the fear of her life, okay? She reached out then and touched the tip of his scepter. Now, that's kind of an odd thing to put in there, but culturally what that meant was that was showing respect for the king. She was following cultural protocol. It'd be very similar to someone going before the Queen Elizabeth, and curtsying. Okay, it was just a cultural protocol that she followed. So he says, "Hey, what's your request?" She says, "Come to a banquet today for you and Haman." Wonderful. Calls Haman to go to the banquet. He says, "Okay, tell me what your request is." She said, "Come to a banquet tomorrow that I'm preparing just for you and Haman, and I'll tell you then." Okay, so Haman here, he's really elated over this. There's 2 banquets in just as many days in his honor, but that elation turns to rage when he walks outside and he sees Mordecai. So he goes home and he calls his wife and his friends together, and he brags about his wealth and his new position in the kingdom. Well, let's think a minute. What does Proverbs 16:18 say? "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." And this is exactly what's going to await Haman, as we'll see in future episodes of the Esther story. Now, you know, on Facebook, you've probably seen these posts. People will post something like, "This company did me wrong," or "This person did me wrong." And what they're looking for sympathy. They're looking for support from other people, and people are going to chip in and they'll give advice on how to get even and all that. Well, of course, this was pre-Facebook time here in our story with Esther. We didn't have Facebook, but we had face-to-face, and that's exactly what Haman is doing here. He's telling this to his friends about his wealth and all that, but he says, "My wealth and position, all that means nothing to me as long as I see Mordecai sitting there at the king's gate, because he won't give me honor." So his wife, his friends, they chip in and basically say, "String him up, okay, execute him." So Haman had the gallows, or the pole, set up. Now, how high was this? This was 50 cubits. We're going to talk about that in a minute, how high that is. So there's a couple of things just about this last verse that I think we need to talk about. First, it depends on your translation, right? You're going to read this, and we saw this a couple of weeks ago. Is it the gallows or is it a pole? I mean, that's 2 completely different things. Well, like I said, it depends on your translation. Was he hanged or was he impaled? Well, in English, we know what the word hanged means. It means to put a noose around your neck, kind of like we see in those old Western movies. The thing is, that really wasn't a form of execution in those ancient times. Now, the Persians did impale people. Literally, they would hang them on a pole as a warning to others. And that Hebrew word that is translated pole or gallows, which there again, that's two separate things. The literal translation is tree or wood. So it's hard to say, but it's probably, most likely, wasn't hanged from the neck like we see in the Western movies, but usually hanged from or impaled on a wooden pole. Now, another thing about this is that 50 cubits. How high is that? You probably have a footnote in your Bible, or you've seen it in your literature. 50 cubits is about 75 feet. A cubit is about 18 inches. And so how high is 75 feet? Well, that's about the height of a 6-story building. That's pretty high. There's no way that Haman could have had either gallows or this 50-foot or 75-foot pole erected overnight. Okay? So this could have been kind of what I would call like a cultural euphemism or an exaggeration, kind of like we might say something like, well, just string him up a mile high for all to see. You know, we don't mean a mile high. This may have just been an exaggeration. Okay, and it could have been that that this pole or whatever was on a hill that literally maybe it may have been that high. But here's the thing, don't get hung up with all this. The Bible accurately records what Haman said. It's not necessary that what Haman spoke was literally true. Okay, he spoke the words 50 foot or 50 cubit pole or 50 cubit gallows. He said that. The Bible records that. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's exactly literally true coming out of Haman's mouth. Okay. So what are some takeaways from this lesson? Well, remember the point. The point is what? The point is humility ultimately wins the day. We can refer to Matthew 5:5 where it says that the meek will inherit the earth. Well, what is that meekness? Meekness is that restrained power. It's not weakness. It's a restrained power. And Esther restrained herself. She was humble as she went before the king. Now, in this chapter, just in this story this week, we can see two opposing attitudes. We can see the pride and arrogance of Haman and how that pits against the humility of Esther. You know, in recent months, I've started watching this show called Live PD, and I don't know why. To me, it's so addicting. I just love watching it. And it's amazing the arrogance of some of those people who were stopped. It seems like the ones who resist the most and have the most arrogant attitudes, they're usually the ones with the most to hide. They're usually the ones who get the harshest punishment. You know, it's those people who comply, who are honest, who are humble, are more likely to get a warning instead of a ticket or an arrest. All right. As another point here in this lesson, as another takeaway, let's encourage you, the class, and let's start with ourselves, right? Start with you as the teacher. In fact, that's what we're supposed to do. The lesson that we teach is supposed to be an overflow of how the lesson has affected us. So as we study this lesson throughout the week, we let the lesson change and affect us, and then we teach from that overflow of how that has affected us, okay? So all that to say, let's let this lesson affect us before we ask them to be changed as well. Here's the thing. Take a good, hard, honest look at yourself. What are your motives when it comes to teaching Sunday school, when it comes to doing anything, whether that's in the church, in your family life, in your job? What are those true motives? Is it to promote yourself? Is it toward pride and self, or is it toward humility? There's a brochure called Not I, But Christ. And at one of my former churches, our senior adult minister had this brochure, and we went through it. To me, I like to go through this once or twice a year just to take an honest look at myself. So I've put this brochure in my Dropbox, and I've included a link to that in the comments section on the YouTube page. So I suggest that you print this off and share it with the class. Maybe go through it. Especially if you've got some time at the end, you might have everybody bow their heads and just kind of read through this. And you'll see what I mean when you read through it. It's an honest examination of oneself. Now, for some reason, that link doesn't work. Email me. My email is right below here. Email me and ask me for that, and I'll send you the PDF of that brochure. Now, remember, this Sunday is Mother's Day, so if you are fortunate enough to still have your mom around, be sure and honor her, call her, visit her if she's local there to you. Also, be very sensitive to those who are, number one, unable to have children, or number two, maybe they've lost a child, and that could have been this year, it could have been 20 years ago. Still, Mother's Day at church can often be that hour of silent anguish in a mother's heart, even a father's heart, in the midst of celebration of others around. So let's be sensitive to that as well, okay? Don't forget to pray for your class. Next week, as I'm recording this, hopefully I'll have some more helpers as we get to go visit the grandchildren out in South Carolina. So you guys have a great week, and like I said, don't forget to pray for your class.